Well, welcome to the blacksmith shop. This is a small shed type building, and I've set this up so that I can do sort of historical blacksmithing, or what's called traditional blacksmithing by many. It's a shop that would sort of replicate the era of about 1885 or 1890 until about 1930. So most of the tools in here are from that era, and these would have been tools that you would have seen in use during that time. They're all working antiques, and we're going to make a couple of simple hooks today to show some basic blacksmithing techniques and the use of some of the basic tools. I also will go over real quickly, beginning here at the beginning, what some of these tools are. Okay, I'll show you the hooks we're going to make today. This is called a drive hook or a nail hook. It's a simple hook. It's got a little twist in it for a decorative purpose. And then this is a hook called a Spade Finial hook. And you can see that it has a finial on top that's shaped sort of like a spade. And this is a nice little hook that would have been put on a post or on the wall with a hand-forged nail, something like this little nail here. So that's that hook. This hook, the nail hook or drive hook, has got a nail on the end at a 90-degree angle, and this would have been hammered in to the post or to the wall. So when we do the forging, I'll try to explain what I'm doing at each step. But in the meantime, before we do that, I'll just go over some tools really quickly. Of course, the basic tools of a blacksmith would have been the anvil and the hammer. This anvil is a hay button anvil. It was manufactured in Brooklyn, New York. This produced, this particular anvil, in 1905. So if you look at it, it's in amazing condition. These things are pretty hard to kill. You really have to work hard to ruin an anvil, although I have seen some of them that have been ruined. There's a floor anvil, which you may see later as we move around. That was manufactured by the Hay Button Company out of Brooklyn, New York. That's 1893, so that's quite an old one. This is a large, what's called a cone mandrel. And cone mandrels were used for forming rings or hoops or round things. This is a large cooking trivet that I made, and to make the round from a flat bar, you heat this in the forge and you work it on the anvil a bit, and when you get it close to as round as you want it, you move to the cone mandrel, and that'll help you make a perfect circle out of this. We have we have 3 post vices. This is my main working post vice. It's it's mounted on a black locust log, which is a log that, black locust is a tree that is very rot resistant. So I can plant that in the floor. It's about 2.5 feet deep. Makes a really super sturdy mount for this vise. These vices with the legs or the posts on them were made so that you could hammer on this without rattling the vise apart, breaking the vise, or rattling your bench that it's mounted on apart. The energy from the blows that you strike are driven down into the ground, and that's where the energy is disseminated. So these were designed specifically for hammering on and twisting and doing all kinds of rough, hard work. So there's 3 of them in the shop. There's a post drill on the wall here. This is about a 1900 era tool. This particular one, I believe, was, believe it or not, a Sears Roebuck model. And it has no markings on it. And I've seen some of these videos of people using these, and I think mostly the Sears ones were not marked by the manufacturer. But we're going to drill a little hole in that Spade Finial hook, so you'll be able to see that in use also. So let's go to the forge. The forge is a coal-fired forge, which would have been appropriate in the time period that we're working. Prior to about 1830, local blacksmiths in this region were using charcoal to heat their fire, to get their forge going. After 1830, soft coal became readily available, mostly because of, believe it or not, the Erie Canal, which was completed in 1825 and enabled coal to come north and east from Pennsylvania by way of barge. Just to give you a little flavor of why it was cheaper and more readily available. A couple of reasons. Wood for charcoal, it was becoming scarce by 1830 because of deforestation and clearing of land for farms. And by the end of 1825, when the Erie Canal was finished, it was kind of fortunate because charcoal could be replaced by coal. Quick note for historians, people who like dates and things and numbers. Before the completion of the Erie Canal, coal had to be transported by horse and wagon, and to move 1 ton of coal 100 miles cost $10 in that period. But when the barge canal was done, to move a ton of coal 100 miles cost $1. So you can see the huge drop in the shipping cost for coal. So coal became, anyway, so we're using coal. So we're going to start up, we'll start with a 1/4 inch round bar. This is just a 1/4 inch round bar, and it's, I don't know, 20 inches long. We're going to start off, we're going to make the spade end of this hook first, the upper end of the hook first. Then we're going to cut this off using a tool called a hardy or a cut-off hardy. This is a chisel that fits in a square hole on the anvil, which is called the hardy hole. And so we're going to use this when this is hot. We're going to cut off the piece to the length we want and then continue forging out the hook part. Okay, let's get started. We'll heat the rod up. Steel is not that good a conductor of heat, so I can hang on to this even though the tip is going to be quite hot. I won't feel it down where my hand is. When I cut this off to make the piece shorter, I'll handle it with the tongs. Pretty hot. Right now I'm forging this to a point, just hammering it on the anvil very gently, and when I get a little point on there, it'll be ready to make the spade. We'll have to go back for another heat, which we can do pretty easily. Okay, I don't know if you can see this, but there's sort of a point on there, and that's what we need to have on there before we sort of mash this flat to make the spade. we got it hot enough again, so we're going to do what we call half blows on the anvil. So now we have that little spade shape formed on there. It's also what we did was we shouldered the piece. You'll notice if you can see it, there's kind of a little right angle in there where the flat meets the round bar again. So you shoulder the piece and you do half blows on the anvil to flatten that and to drive it out a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take and put this back in the fire. We're going to heat the area down around here, and then we're going to cut it off at about 6-inch total length. Then we're going to grab it with the tongs and forge out the hook. Now, technically, when you go to cut on this cut-off hardy or the hardy, you use either a copper or a brass hammer. And I have a brass hammer here. I use this so that when I strike the hot piece of steel, if I strike too hard and I go through, I won't damage my forging hammer, the face of my forging hammer. But this we can sacrifice. This is a softer material than steel. So this will also not damage my forging hammer, but it won't damage my cut-off hardy. So we'll use this to do the cutting. I have a nice antique one of those hammers up here that I don't use. I want to preserve it in its pristine antiques. But this is a complete brass handle and hammerhead. So I don't use this, and I bought this one from Harbor Freight. Okay, it's pretty red, pretty hot. I kind of roll it on the hardy so that I get a nice groove in it, and then we just need to take and kind of bend it off. Okay, so I'll put this over here. So there it is, cut off, and now we're going to put this back down here. We don't want to leave that hardy in the hole when we're forging, because you could strike that with your knuckle or your hand and it wouldn't be fun. So one of the basic safety techniques at blacksmith is they always take the hardy tools out when they go back to forging. So now I'm going to handle this with this tongs. This is a bolt tongs. It's a tongs with a round space underneath the gripping part, and this will allow me to grip that little piece I cut off and kind of keep the spade part in here so I can work with it. To get the point on the end where we're going to create the little curl curl, the decorative curl. I'll show you that too. We're going to create this little decorative curl right here. So this has to be pointed. So you can't really taper a round thing out. You forge it to a square first, and then when you get it tapered out to a nice point, you reforge it to a round shape. And then we can put the little decorative curl in, which also actually had a function. You wouldn't want to leave a real pointy thing on your hook so that if you hung your coat on here, it would make a hole in it. So that kind of protects whatever you hang. And then on the horn of the anvil, the round part of the anvil, we'll forge the actual hook. So I'm going to square this up a little bit. Believe it or not, even though it's a warm day, the face of the anvil's cold. It was fairly cool last evening. So what happens is when you bring a small piece of material out from the fire, it loses heat really quickly because the cold anvil sucks the heat away. So you'll notice how fast this thing goes from red to black. So a blacksmith has to work quickly in most circumstances, but especially when the anvil's cool. This process is called forging it to a taper, and I'll show you when I pick this up. I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so that's forged to a square taper. It's not round, but the sides are 90 degrees. So now I'll heat it again and I'll round it all up and bring it out to a finer point, and we'll be ready to do the curl. I didn't tell you earlier, but this type of a forge is what's called a bottom blast forge. And that's a hand cranked blower. It's a Champion 400 blower that was made in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, turn of the last century, 1900s era. Really super efficient. The fact that that's still working, after what, 100 plus years, is pretty amazing. The blast goes down that tube that you see, the silver tube underneath, and comes up through some plumbing down there called a tweer. The tweer allows the air to come up from the bottom and give you a bottom blast. And it's really efficient, works really super, gives you lots of heat. So we're going to forge this to a round shape by knocking down the square corners. And even though the material is now black and there's no longer any red or orange color, it's still somewhat soft, so you can still hammer it a little bit and make some progress. Rotating a piece on the anvil and hitting it with very light blows just to kind of get that rounded shape that I want on the tip of this thing. And that gray stuff that comes off the piece we call scale, and actually what it is, it's rapidly oxidized steel. When the air comes in contact with that red hot piece of metal, rapid oxidation occurs. It's sort of like really high-speed rust, but it doesn't come off looking rusty, it comes off looking gray flakes. Okay, that's fairly round and should make a fairly good point on the hook. Probably doesn't look much different than the square taper I held up, but there it is. And so what we'll do next is we'll forge that decorative little curl on the end and then bend the hook over the horn of the anvil. The anvil it's interesting, it has all the parts are named. This is the horn up front. This is the face where you do all your hammering and striking. This is called a step. It's a little step down from the face. The step was a place where you usually would, if you were using a hot cut from above, which would be a tool like this. This is another cutting tool. It's called a hot cut. You could cut on the step using your hammer, not your forging hammer, but your hammer. And you wouldn't, using that, you wouldn't cut into the face of the anvil where you do your forging. You'd cut into the step, which is less important, and you really don't forge on the step. This is the waist of the anvil, and these are the feet. So all of the parts come together. The anvil is made out of wrought iron, the body, and the cut and the face on top, the hammering part, is made from about a 3 to a 5/8 inch thick piece of steel, which was forge welded on here at the factory. The steel being a lot harder than iron, so it can take a lot more hammering and a lot more punishment. So as you forge, your fire, you have to add coal, you have to shift the fuel in here so that you don't get what's called a hollow fire. You want that fuel to be down low in the fire pot so that when you put the blast of air on it, it burns nicely, quickly, and efficiently. Taper, a sharp taper, you have to be careful you don't overheat the piece because you can actually burn the steel. And when you do that, you essentially ruin the piece. So you have to watch in the fire, watch the color of the end of that piece, You don't want it to get above about an orange color. If you get into yellows and white heats, then that's when it'll start to burn. We're going to do a little curl now over the side end of the anvil here. So that's the little decorative curl that we wanted to get. And next we'll heat it again and then bend the hook. Most blacksmith shops, even today, the forging area needs to be somewhat in the dark because blacksmiths use the color of the steel or iron to tell how hot it is. So you need different levels of heat for different procedures. If we were going to do forge welding, which is what you need to do when you're closing a ring on a hoop like this, you can see here there's a little seam visible. This flat bar was made round and then it was welded in the forge. So the heat has to get up to about 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you know it's that hot when the steel is bright yellow or white. Then you take it out and you weld it. So that's why most of the time these forging areas are in the dark, semi-dark. Now, when we take this piece out, we have to quench that little curve that we made so that when we hammer the thing over the horn, we don't mash that little decorative curl. So I'll quench in this little can of water. Tip. Get everything sort of straight and lined up. Okay, so that's pretty hot right now, but that's the hook with the Spade Finial on top. So what I'm going to do is just quench this in my, we call a slack tub or a quenching tub. It's interesting when you're quenching a large piece, there's so much heat in the piece that you have to swirl it around, because as you quench this, it forms a steam jacket around the piece. As it's cooling, instead of water contacting it, there's steam instead. So you have to swirl it around, get rid of the steam jacket so you can quench it thoroughly and quickly. Just going to dry it off, and then we're going to center punch the place where we want the, this is just a tool called a center punch. You use this with a hammer and you make a little indentation in that finial so that when you bring the drill down on it, the drill doesn't skip around, it just stays right where you want it to be. So again, we're not going to strike this with our forging hammer. We're going to use a small hand sledgehammer. And that way we won't damage the face of the forging hammer. If we were to do that, anytime we hit a piece of hot metal, we'd leave the mark from the forging hammer in the metal. So one quick shot, and that gives us a little indentation. Now we'll shift over here to the post drill. This drill came from a farm in Deer Isle, Maine, and I bought it from a guy who claims it was a single owner tool. It's in really great shape. When I got it, it was real rusty, really messed up looking. So I de-rusted it using a couple of soaking in vinegar, believe it or not. Will take rust off of most surfaces. And depending on how rusty, it may take a little longer. This big solid steel bar that really supports, that took me about 2 weeks to get the rust off of it. But it's in great shape. All the gears are oiled up. There's a little, what we call a dog on the top up here. So once you lower your drill to where you want to start drilling, you flip the dog, and as this drill turns, that little dog pushes this gear around and slowly lowers the drill bit into the piece. So this is pretty thin. It's not going to take long to drill through. But we'll get it set up and then we'll go. And lower the drill bit. And get it right on that center punch mark. Okay, that's on pretty good. Tighten it down, flip the dog over, and pretty quickly this will drill through. Okay, flip the dog back. And there's the hole drilled through. Didn't get it exactly in the middle, but close enough for hand forged. So, and there's a little burr on the back, so we'll just file that off real quick. When you use a file, most people don't know this today because everything's done with power tools, but file is designed to do the cutting on the push stroke. That's how you file. You don't, if you come back and forth, the back stroke has to be real light, and then the down forward stroke heavy. So an old fellow taught me that when I first started using these kind of tools. So that's finished, and we're going to go now to the, of course this is quite a bit smaller than the one I showed you at the beginning, and that all depends on how big you want to make the hook and where you want to cut it off. Now we're going to go to the nail hook or the drive hook, and as I said, these were made to be driven in. So for example, if we wanted to put a hook down here, we would just hammer that right in as far in as we wanted, and we'd have the hook. So we're going to use a piece of already cut, in this case 1/4 inch square stock, because that hook is not a round type hook, it's a square hook. So what we're going to do is we're going to forge this out and create a little shovel shape on the end of it. I don't know if you see that on this one. I don't know how good we can show this, but there's a little kind of a shovel shape or a flattened shape instead of a sharp hook there, a little curl. And then the whole thing remains square. We do a taper on the nail. That'll be straight up when we're done. The second to last thing we do is we bend that at a 90 in the vise, and then we'll put the twist in it using a tool. Most blacksmiths make these tools. They're called twisting wrenches. And this tool fits on here, and when we clamp one end in the vise and twist, we'll get it, and turn it, we'll get a nice twist effect there. So the first thing we'll do is we'll do the nail taper, and then we'll go to the hook side. Yeah, where's my tongs? There they are. Tell you a funny story about tongs. I was working out here one day for probably 3-4 hours, and I was getting ready to put everything away. And so I always put all my tools back in the right racks and things. And I'm walking around and I'm saying, I can't find my tongs. I don't know what I did with them. They gotta be in the shop someplace. And then I realized they were in my hand. So I don't know if that's a good thing. I'm so comfortable with the tools that I don't even know I'm holding them, or I'm kind of getting senile. Raked a little more coal into the back of the fire because the coal turns to coke as you heat it, and then the coke sort of disintegrates as it burns. So the fire fuel pile diminishes, so you have to replenish it. Taper again. Okay, we've pretty quickly forged that square piece out to a point. I'd like to make it a little sharper, so I'm going to give it one more heat and really push it out to a fine point. People often ask, when smiths are hammering, you'll notice when I hammer the piece, you'll hear that. I'll move off the piece. That's not really an intentional strike, but what you do is when you're done hammering and you look at the piece, you move the hammer and you drop it, you relax your grip to kind of rest your hand. So that's why you get that distinctive It's not really something I'm doing purposefully. I'm actually trying to rest my hand. And there are some old tales about why blacksmiths do that on the anvil. And one of them is to keep the devil away from the blacksmith shop. And it goes like this. The devil came to a blacksmith shop one day to have his hoofs shoed. So the blacksmith, knowing who he was, decided to shoe him improperly so that he would have pain when he walked. And so, in the future, every time the devil comes near a blacksmith shop and he hears, stays far away. He doesn't want to get involved with a blacksmith anymore. So that's the story. Anyway, that's about as tapered as we want it. So now we're going to turn it around and we're going to do that sort of shovel shaped curl, and then we'll do the hook again over the horn. So that's a different kind of taper, but it's kind of like what I call a shovel shape. So now we're going to just bend that over like we did Spade Finial hook. Shape that we look for there. Could curl it over just a tad more. I think I will. Okay, so that's about where I want it, and now we're going to go back in the fire, do another heat, quench the tip, and bend the hook over the wire. brush some of the scale off just to sort of clean the metal. Otherwise the scale will stick on there and it'll give it a rough surface. It's not as nice as we'd like it to look. Okay, so now pick this up so you can see. So now we have the hook almost done. The next step is to do the 90-degree bend of the nail. We'll do that in the vise. Put it in the vise, bend it around with the tongs, and tap it with the hammer so that it forms a nice 90. And then lastly, we'll do the twist. Hooks like this were used, just the way this one is, to nail overhead into a beam so that you could hang things from it. I don't know if we need to turn, but over here I have some hacksaws hanging on hooks that are like this, driven into the overhead beam there. So this would have been used this way or as a nail hook. Now I'll make sure I'm set up. Just open that a little. When you're forging, as I said, the piece will lose heat quickly. So anything you're going to do to that piece, you have to pre-plan, lay your tools out ahead of time where you want them to be. So I'm going to use my hammer and the vise for this. So I want the hammer over there, and I want the vise open, ready to accept the piece. And then when I bring it out, I'm all set. I'll just put my tongs down and do what I have to do. In there about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, pretty tightly, and we're going to pull it this way with the tongs and hammer it with the hammer. And hammering that flat surface on there will give us a place when we drive the hook into the post to hit with the hammer. Give us a flat spot to hit. Let's see how that looks. Might need a little adjusting. Yep. It's a little bit crooked. So I'm going to heat it again and just adjust it on the anvil with the hammer. That fits in the hardy hole, and since that's a fairly short piece of material, I won't be able to adjust it on this broad flat face, but I can do it on this face, which is a lot narrower. Can go by several names. I call it a bottom set, or it can be called a bolster block, several other different names. Okay, we're going to adjust it a little bit here. Get it nice and straight before we twist it. We'll give it another heat for the twist so that it twists nice and clean. So how does it look now? It doesn't look too bad. I want to bring that down again to a 90-degree angle. I think we can do that. It's what we call a black heat, but it's still warm enough to move. And just pull it around. There we go. That looks better. Hey, my thumb's stuck in there. All right. So that looks about the way we want that to look. And now we're going to heat it up and we're going to clamp the nail end over here. And we're going to put the twisting wrench right underneath the end of the hook, because it'll only twist between the places where it's clamped and where the wrench is. So if we want to make more of a twist, we can push this back here. Less of a twist, we push it up here. So usually I put them right about there. That seems to work pretty well. And we always treat everything in the blacksmith shop like it's hot. And there's a story about a guy who was kind of a cocky fellow. He came in the blacksmith shop one day, and the smith had made several items and had laid them on a table, a metal table, and told the guy, you know, don't touch things because they can be hot. Of course, the guy, being kind of cocky and knowing everything, disregarded that, and not long after, a few minutes went by and the smith was forging away and throwing stuff on the table. The guy grabbed one of the hot pieces to look at it, and oh, he immediately dropped it. And the smith said, "It was hot, wasn't it?" And he said, "No, not really. I just look at things very quickly." So that's a story that, be careful when you come in the blacksmith shop. Don't pick up anything. Most of the things are hot. Okay, we're going to heat this up and do that decorative twist. Because by the time I get it out here, clamp it in the vise, put the twisting wrench on and start twisting, it'll lose a fair amount of heat. So it's harder to twist and get a nice uniform twist when it is cooling. So we want to get it nice and hot and keep it hot, so we'll bring it up to a pretty hot heat. Okay, that's nice and hot. Now you got to keep your hands away from that falling scale, because that stuff is hot, and if it hits your hand it'll burn you fairly well. alcohol being burned, something well. But anyway, I'm going to brush it again to get the scale off. And the twisting process, although when you see it twist in a piece of steel, it looks like, wow, that must have been pretty complicated and hard to do. Actually, it's one of the easier things to do. Now we'll brush it this way. Maybe you can see the scale maybe falling off. And brush it. And something like this, I normally, when I make these, I don't quench them. There's really no need to, but for today, so we can handle this piece, we'll quench it. Okay, so that's that. Try it off a bit. Get a fairly close view of it. So these are very simple things to make, but they illustrate a lot of techniques that are basic to blacksmithing. Forging to a taper, doing little curls and then larger curls or hook shapes over the anvil, twisting with a twisting wrench and the vise. These are some of the basic things that blacksmiths do. And here with the Spade Finial, this is another basic thing where you take something that's round or square and you flatten it out. So you forge it out. If we were going to do something really large, we would use the peen part of the hammer, which is, this is called a cross peen hammer. This is the face of the hammer and this is the peen, and you'll notice it goes across at a horizontal. A straight peen hammer has the peen this way. So this is used to mash the piece and spread it. So if we're making something like a spatula or something that needs to be spread, that's how we would do it. There's a bunch of other tools in here, but we won't take time to go over them because that's a whole nother day or another hour of looking at things. So that's pretty much the program for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things about blacksmithing and sort of historical or traditional blacksmithing. I believe, and I could be wrong, that we're in Jefferson, New York, in Schoharie County, and I believe there were 3 blacksmith shops here at the height of blacksmithing. The smarter people from the Historical Society can check that out and make sure it's true. Somebody's nodding their head, so that means, yeah, there were 3 shops in Jefferson. Okay, thanks for watching and hope you enjoyed it.